Hello again. This is the second part of the tutorial to show you how I make this Dollhouse scale floor lamp. If you followed the first part of the tutorial, you should have a 3-volt LED that's wired to Dollhouse wire. The frame is very simple. It's made with some brass tube and some brass rod, so that's solid, that's got a hole straight down the middle. Now I can't tell you what size to use because the wire on your LED dictates how big the tube is. You need to buy some tube that will allow you to put the Dollhouse wire inside like that. Once you've established what size tube you want, pick a piece of rod that's a similar sort of size so it doesn't look out of place when you finish your frame. Okay, first thing you need to do, you need to put a tapered edge onto this piece of tubing, and the reason for that, when you put your wire in inside, you need somewhere for it to escape. So all I've done on this piece of tube is cut it at an angle. You could use, these are cable clips, or you could use a junior hacksaw and just file the edge so it's nice and tidy. Whatever you use, make sure you also clean the inside of the tube. When the wire runs through the tube, it needs to be clean, because if there's any little bits of metal inside, it's going to catch the wiring. To do mine, I just used a round needle file. You just put it inside the tube and just spin it, just to make sure you get all the sharp edges out. Or you could use a jewellery reamer. This is exactly the same idea. It's just a file, very small, goes inside. Once you've done that, the first thing you need to do before you solder any brass is you have to clean it. Brass is known as a greasy metal. It doesn't take paint very well. It doesn't like soldering very well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to rough it up a bit. We're just going to score the surface, and it gives something for the paint to hold on to and the solder to hold on to. You don't need anything special. I use steel wool. You could also use the scouring pad on a domestic sponge. You just need to clean the outside, a bit of a scuff, all the way across on both pieces of metal. Okay, so this is a solid rod, so to make this part of the frame you just need to find the middle, get some pliers, these are round nose jewellery pliers, and you need the bend to be as small as possible, like that. You then measure, if you're going to do the same size lamp that I have, the legs are 75 millimeters or 7.5 centimeters long. So I'm just going to mark each leg. You just put it in there, and 75. Do the other side. 75. That just makes sure that they're even. So I'm going to snip them at that mark. These are very stiff. The distance you need between the legs, there's no great science to this. I've made it at about 40 millimeters. Anything above that's great. Anything smaller than that, the frame tends to become very unbalanced and it topple over. So that is 43 millimeters, so that's great. Now you can start to see it coming together. It'll be sort of that shape. Now in order to solder this to this, I'm going to key the metal so that that sits in it and it's rough so that the solder will take. So I'm just going to get this spare block and I'm going to use my round jewellery file, and I'm just going to score it like that. If you notice, I'm doing it at an angle because that's how this metal is going to sit against it. So it's got an ever so small groove which this metal is going to sit into. Now the next part, you just get a piece of blue tack and what you want to do is just use the blue tack to hold the legs while you put it together so that you can solder it. So that's just holding it in place, but I can move it at any angle just to work out where I'm going to put the lamp. I'm going to do the same for this bit. Now at this point you've got to make sure that the angled part where the wire is going to come out faces that way. So your wire is going to run down there and go out the back, and this will be the front of your lamp. You'll see what I mean when I get there. You just have to manipulate it until it's sort of like that. Now if you think once this is done it's going to be bent that way and down, so your actual lamp's going to be this side. So these legs here are actually supporting this bit. Now the great bit, the bit I like the best, which is the soldering. Now this soldering iron, it's exactly the same one that I used in part 1 of the tutorial. The difference is I've changed the end so it's no longer a soldering bit, it's now a torch. If you don't have a soldering iron already, I would advise you to get something like this because it means you can solder and you can use a torch, and it's very useful for brazing metals, doing this sort of work. You never know, you might have fun. So I'm just going to switch this on. I'm just going to put it on it. Actually, I'm going to put it on the side of the table because I am extremely clumsy and I tend to set fire to myself and cut myself and drop things on my feet. So while that's heating up, this is the flux that we used in the first tutorial. Always use flux when you're soldering. If you don't use it, what tends to happen is the solder will stick to the soldering iron instead of the thing that you're trying to stick together. So you just take a dab of the flux, and what you're going to do is just put it on the spot where you're going to solder. Then you get a bit of solder. Oh, I've got my tools spread out all over the place. Now, rather than you use your soldering iron and dab it with the solder, this is much easier if you just take a tiniest bit of solder, and I'm just going to use that brush. You have to be ever so careful. It's just sitting on the end, and I'm going to stick it so it is sitting on the flux and in between these two parts. Now, solder and brass, very simple. You need to heat all of the metal around the area that you're going to solder, and solder always heads towards heat. So if you want the solder to run down, you need to put the heat from bottom up. So you'll see what I mean. So just a little bit of heat all over, and then from underneath, and that's it. The solder's now run downwards in between the two parts of the frame. Switch her off. Now give it about 10 seconds, the time it takes me to take the blue tack off. And there you go, solid. For something as small as this, that's strong enough to support the weight of the lamp. Okay, next bit. Now this bit, we are going to put the wire, and we are going to put the lampshade on first, because if we start to bend the tube without the wire inside, it'd be almost, well, it'd be actually impossible to get this wired down. So this is the shade that I've used on my lamp, and it was a bowl I bought from Country Contrast at a miniature fair. It's just aluminium, and I have used the same size drill bit as my brass tubing, and I've just centered it and I have drilled a hole through like that. So you have to put that on first. You just slide that down. Then you get the end of your wire and you put in your tube and just slowly start feeding it through. Sometimes it kinks and you have to start again. It's best to straighten your wire out first before you start, and you just keep going and going and going and it eventually, you're hoping it comes through. If it doesn't come through, there's a kink somewhere and you've got to start again. Just get yourself a cup of tea while this goes on. Ah, there we go. So it's come through there. So you see now where the wire is there, because the front of the lamp is here, you want the wire out the way, out the back. Right, so the next bit, on the back of the LED where you've soldered, it's bare solder and there's a little bit of bare wire shown. Now, this causes a lot of problems in Dollhouse wire, because if that solder or that bare wire touches anything that isn't insulated, it stops the light working. So what you need to do is you have to insulate the back of that wire and LED against it touching anything. And I've found the best thing to use, this is a 2-part epoxy resin. It's just a glue. You mix it together in equal parts, and what I do is I put a big dab on the back of there, a big dab inside of there, and then I pull that through so it's nice and tight inside. And then what I would do is hang that upside down while it glues. So that's what I'm going to do next. Be back in a minute. So this is what you should have. And now we are going to bend the frame like that. And it makes it easier because this wire is inside of the tube. It actually bulks up the tube, because ordinarily when you bend a tube it'll flatten out, but the wire stops that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure about 120 millimeters, 12 centimeters, and bend it there. I'll put these measurements on the blog so you don't have to remember them. So I'm just going to mark 120. That's going to be the first bend. Then I'm going to measure about, do it that way, I'm going to measure it about 60 millimeters, that's 6 centimeters, and mark it again. And the way you bend it, because this is a supporting frame, so it's going to bend that way, you find your mark, make sure that that is sort of equal because you want it to be nice and straight, and then you just slowly bend it over, down over. Just take your time with it. You don't want to do it too fast or damage it. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And then again, you bend it at the top. So try and make sure it's right in the middle and symmetrical. And I'm going to bend it again. It's a bit fiddly, but we'll get there. How does that look? Maybe it's a bit more. I want it to be looking down on somebody, maybe he's reading a book at a chair. Yeah, I like the look of that. So the next part is to decide what colour paint you want to do it. When you're painting brass, as I said, it's a greasy metal and it doesn't like paint very much. So because you've cleaned it with this and put like a key in the metal, I use Tamiya paint. I find this excellent paint. This is a primer and it's used for plastics and metals. So what I would do, I would actually hang it upside down out in the garden somewhere, out in the fresh air, because it stinks and really you should wear a mask when you're using this. And then I would just give it 2 coats. 1 coat, let it dry, takes about 5 minutes. Then another coat. Make sure that you get in all the nooks and crannies. Spray it down onto your frame, onto your lampshade, sorry. And then once you've done that and the whole of the frame and the shade are covered, then you can get the colour you choose. Again, I use Tamiya. This is a beautiful French blue. It's for plastics, but it sticks really well to the primer. So a couple of coats of that, and then we'll come back and show you how to put a switch on and make sure that your lamp works. Back in a minute. Okay, I'm back. This is the lamp after 2 coats of primer and 2 coats of your paint. We're on the final stretch now. So if you want to attach a switch, I buy these. This is how they normally come. The yellow wire indicates it's the positive side, the white is the negative. It's just a 3-volt switch. So if you remember before, I told you to mark the positive side of your dollhouse wire. It just makes it easier, so you know that positive to positive, negative to negative, and we can switch it on and just make sure that the lamp works. Thank goodness for that. So to connect these, you can either take these out and solder the wire inside. It just means that the box, you can hide it anywhere in your miniature scene and just switch it on and off, so you don't have to wire it into your dollhouse circuit. Or you can just use some heat shrink. You would just entwine the positive sides together and the negative sides together and put some heat shrink tube over the top, and just to keep it insulated. So basically that's it. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. I hope you can use the techniques you've learned in your own pieces. Have a great day. Bye.